questions. But to make it easier, if you could pop your questions into the chat, and then if we don't manage to cover them, we can make sure that we'll do that later. Just get back to you with the answers. First of all, thank you very much, Josie, for agreeing to do this. We're very fortunate to have you here for this workshops, well, the 2 workshops tomorrow as well. This is from what I know of you. So Josie's an enthusiastic botanist with a love of New Zealand's plants and wild areas. And she's been the inspiration and driving force behind the Lumsden Community Nursery, which propagates eco-sourced native plants. As we go out there tomorrow, you'll see those. And she's a key member, so trustee and founder of the Northern Southland Reforestation Trust. And from the Trust webpage, which you can all go on to, the purpose is to grow, replant and regenerate areas of native bush from riparian and marginal planting to larger reserves and parks for the benefit of the local ecosystem and the enjoyment of the local community. Something I think we can all share. But I know Josie's put together a very comprehensive session for us today. So without further ado, hand over to you.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. I think as Katrina's covered quite well who I am, so thank you. It was very nice being called a botanist. I think that's maybe a stretch, but in plant enthusiast, plant nerd, probably fall into one of those categories. But yes, as mentioned, I'm co-founder and trustee of Northern Southland Reforestation Trust, and we run the Lumsden Community Nursery, where we grow eco-sourced plants from the local area. So Northern Southland is our local area. I'll talk a bit about ecological districts and stuff in a bit, but so there's quite a lot that we can cover today. So I'm going to try and keep it quite concise for each topic that we talk about. If you've got any questions, you can pop them in the chat, and then we'll have a kind of question and answer session at the end. I see someone says you can't see my screen. Can other people's? No, so no one can see my. Okay. For some reason, I think maybe it's when you started recording it. So I'll just stop and start. I'll stop sharing and I'll start sharing again. So, and you can tell me if that works.
We've got you back again. Yes.
Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
Everybody else, you're welcome to turn your cameras back on. I didn't know it would do that when we started the recording. So if you'd like us to see you, just turn your camera back on.
Yeah, it's quite good. It respects your privacy.
Yeah.
So we'll jump right in. Come on here. So things we're going to try and cover off today. We'll introduce you to eco-sourcing, which is an important topic for when you're collecting and growing for restoration projects. A bit about seed collection, which is my personal favourite hobby. Some propagation techniques, and all of those things are to support the long-term native restoration in Southland. We'll talk a bit about the theory, some IDQs, so how to identify seed and how to tell when it's ready to harvest. A little bit about rules and permissions, some tips and tricks for labelling, processing, sowing, growing, and then we'll finish off with some suggestions for your next steps for your project planning and whatever you've got going on. And then we'll, as I said, we'll have about 30 minutes for questions. So here's just some pictures of some of the stuff we do at the nursery. So some seed collecting and a bit of growing, and you can see a few different seed types in there. So we'll jump in and start with eco-sourcing. So I don't know how much people already know about eco-sourcing, but basically eco-sourcing is growing plants from seeds or from cuttings, but mainly from seeds, collected from naturally occurring vegetation in a locality close to where they are planted or as part of a restoration project or revegetation project. So one of the interesting things we can look at, and I can share some information about, is ecological districts. So we sit in Lumsden. I think most of you guys are Southland based, but this applies throughout the country. So New Zealand is split up into a set of what we call ecological districts. And it's not split by any kind of council regulations or property boundaries or anything like that. It's split up by ecosystems basically, and similar climates and growing conditions for plants. So where we sit in Lumsden, we actually sit at the kind of corners of 3 different districts. So we're quite lucky, we can kind of jump across boundaries and collect from different areas depending on the projects that we're looking at. While it's a little bit nerdy and a little bit techie, it is actually really helpful for you to kind of understand about your planting projects and what things will grow well in the areas that you're looking at planting. It's also really important when you're looking at collecting seed, because you want to collect seed that's going to grow well in the conditions that you've got on your property or for your project. So if you're collecting from outside of your ecological district, you may be collecting from seeds and plants that don't naturally grow where you are, or just ones that won't grow as well. You could find ones locally that would grow better. So it's not a hard and fast rule when it comes to eco-sourcing that you stick to your ecological district, but it's kind of best practice to try and stick as close as you can. There are some eco-sourcing maps. They're quite hard to find, but I can share. I can't get into that part of my screen at the moment. I can share in the chat. Hold on, if I escape that. The doc actually has a map which shows you all the ecological districts. I'll pop that in the chat. That's quite handy. And then once you know your district, it kind of, again, it gives you an idea of kind of where to collect, but there's also some cool guides out there that talk about what plants and what naturally grows in those different districts. So I've got a folder of resources that I can share with everybody. So when we come to the end of the workshop, you can either, probably don't want to pop your emails in the chat, but if we share email addresses with Katrina, or if she's already got those, we can share some useful resources with you. Just put that slideshow back up. So why we use local seed, we've covered a little bit, but the benefits include having a higher survival rate for your plants, and they've built a resilience to local climate stresses, so they will naturally grow better in your environment. So that's the kind of practical side of it, but then there's also slightly kind of ethical side of it, is that it preserves your kind of local ecosystems and ecotypes, and the relationships that plants have adapted to each other in that region, and preserves local genetics and genetic diversity. So you might find when you start collecting that people offer you seed all the time. When we start the nursery, people are like, oh, I've got some cabbage tree seed from my garden, or I've got, some corfai I picked from outside Mitre 10. And we unfortunately kind of have to turn it down because we don't know where it's come from. We don't know its what's the word? Its provenance. We don't know its history. Whether it's come from a plant that was originally grown on the North Island or in Christchurch and been shipped down here. So there's some kind of things to think about when you're collecting seed. if you want to know about which species are local to your area, there's a few good guides out there. For Southland, if you have a look at the Southland Community Nursery, they've got a really good plant list of what's local to their area. We've also got a seed collecting calendar, which has a list of the plants that we collect from our area, which we can share. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. But yeah, just so important to kind of reiterate that if you're not sure where something has come from originally, it's better in the long term to avoid it, especially if you are doing a large restoration project and trying to restore the natural ecosystem to an area. Some bits and pieces about permission and ethics. There's a little bit of ethical debate about, mixing up ecosystems and collecting seed from outside of your ecosystem. It's best to collect from inside your ecosystem where possible. Sometimes that's not possible, where there's not remnant bush, or if there's not a particular species still growing in that area but has grown in that area, then kind of collecting from outside of the area is okay. But yeah, so it's always good to check where things are from. We say it's kind of similar to foraging ethics, where you shouldn't take all of something. So we say don't take more than 10% of seed from an individual plant or population. This minimizes the impact to the local ecosystem. You're not taking food away from birds and lizards as well, important. But it's also important in other ways. If you collect just from one plant, so you collected a whole heap of seed, all of one plant, you're not getting a very good mix of genetics. So you might get some things which survive, or you might kind of what's what I'm looking for? You kind of inherit some unwanted genes sometimes in plants. So it's good to mix up and collect from a lot of different plants if you can. So always get landowner permission and get written permission where possible, especially if you're working on a restoration project. If you're working on your own property and you've got remnant source of remnant bush or remnant wetlands or other examples, you don't need to get your own permission. That's fine. Collect from your own sources. The only things to check is perhaps if you've got a QE2 covenant, you would just double check what your covenant says, but generally it's fine to collect seed from your own properties. Public conservation land on dockland, you definitely need permits, and they are quite not time consuming, but you have to like paperwork and take a little bit of time to get done. So if the only area that you can find to collect from is dockland, then you need to apply directly to them, and you need to give them some good reasons why you need to collect from the dock estate or from a crown land. And the last note is just respecting cultural values and Tauranga species. Again, depends on where you're collecting from and who owns the land, but just be mindful and respectful of the land that you're collecting from. Moving on. So identifying seeds. So this is probably more of we'll jump into the more practical stuff, which is probably what you're all here for. So identifying seed and fruit by maturity. So you need to check regularly once you've found your seed sources. because things like if you're collecting coprosmas will be you'll be waiting weeks for them to ripen. You turn your back, they ripen, the birds eat them. So you have to kind of just keep an eye on things and keep checking back. Once you do it, the more you do it, the more you get an idea of when things will be ready. And as I mentioned before, we've got a seed collecting calendar that we can share, which gives you just a rough idea of when different plants are ready to harvest. So for things like Carex, if you're doing a wetland restoration, you'll definitely be wanting some Carex sector. We've probably just missed collecting season, but I did just before this workshop went down to one of our planting projects, and there is still a little bit of seed left on the Carex. So if you're collecting for a wetland restoration, if you're getting quick, you can still get some. What you're looking for is kind of long seed heads with lots of tiny little hard nuts on them. I don't know if nuts is not the correct botanical term, but they're like tiny little nuts. And you can easily pull them off by you just grabbing the stalk and you run your fingers down it and grab it and into a bag, just so if you've got a bag ready. For Carex, just a good tip is to wear gloves because they are cutty, as also known as cutty grass. So you will end up with lots of little tiny slices on your fingers if you're not careful. But yeah, the easiest way is literally just grab the seed head and just pull it all off into a bag. Things like berries, things to look out for is color change. And again, you just need to keep checking regularly. Things like coprosma, which is a really good plant for restoration projects. Usually we would collect Coprosma propinqua, also known as mingy mingy. Has little white berries. So when they're unripe, they're green. When they're ripe, they go a lovely white colour. So I've got some images to share as well, so to give you some ideas. But as mentioned before, you've got to get in quick before the birds get them. And then things that have seed pods, e.g. Ko-Fi. You normally wait for the pods to go dry and brown and collect, especially if you're collecting and storing seed. One thing that you can do with Ko-Fi is actually collect them when they're green. And while the seeds inside are still green, and then you get quick germination from them. So you get them before the seeds go into a dormancy, basically. So you can get the seeds, put them down quickly, and they'll germinate really quickly. A lot of the time, people with Ko-Fi say, "Oh, I've got Ko-Fi seeds down and they're not germinating, and what have I done wrong?" Or people do, spend hours nipping each Ko-Fi seed and making a little notch in it to try and get it to germinate. And it's all, in my opinion, it's all unnecessary. You can just have to be patient and just wait for the seeds to come back out of the dormancy. But yeah, if you collect them while they're green, you can kind of avoid that waiting period. So it's just a little tip, a little trick. Another thing which is really fun is collecting from leaf litter. And we do this at the community nursery. It gives you an idea of things that are growing in your ecosystem. So say you've got a bit of remnant bush. If you collect some leaf litter from the ground there, you're going to get seed that's fallen from trees. You're going to get seed that's been dropped by birds. You're going to get some seed that's been dispersed by the wind. You'll get some seed that's 1 or 2 seasons old. And it's kind of interesting to note that some seeds do take that long to germinate. So you get a real mix of seeds when you collect a leaf litter, and then it's just really fun to see what comes up. So you'll get a mix of things, and we'll talk a little bit later about which species you want to plant initially in restoration projects. And then which you would leave to a later stage planting. When you're collecting leaf litter, you kind of get a mix of all the different stages. So it's not always the most kind of practical, but it is really fun and interesting just to see what grows. So we'll just go through a few pictures. So things to look out for. So if you're doing wetland restoration, again, Toi Toi is a really good plant to be growing. What you're looking out for when you're collecting seed is the fluffy seed heads. So again, we're just past the perfect collecting season, but if you go and look in the places that are sheltered from the wind, or if you look for seed heads that are lower down on the plant, you can still find some seeds. So you'll see the picture on the left is just a bit of a zoomed out picture of the whole Toi Toi seed head, and you can see it's quite full and fluffy. And then on the right, it's just a close up there, and you see those wee fluffy seed heads. So the seeds are actually attached, just a tiny little seed attached to the fluffy seed head, and that's how they're dispersed by the wind. So if we've had high winds, quite a lot of the seed disappear quickly. But yeah, so you still got a chance if you get in quick to get some Toi Toi seed. Another plant that's really good in restoration plantings is Pittosporum, and quite commonly grown and common across pretty much all of New Zealand. The two species we get in Southland is Pittosporum tenuifolium, which is the normal Pittosporum, and then what we call lemonwood, which I forget in this instant the Latin name for. Maybe Katrina can tell us.
Glenioides. Yes, Pittosporum tenuifolium is this one, and Euglenoides.
Euglenoides, that's
it. Muted, right? Yeah.
Lemonwood. So, they have similar but slightly different seeds. So what we've got on screen here is Pittosporum tenuifolium. On the right hand side is the unripe berries, or capsules. They're not berries, capsules. They're kind of green and velvety. You need to wait, so don't be tempted to pick them early like this. So just wait for them. When they're ripe, they basically almost kind of explode outwards like this alien creature you see on the left. The capsule opens up, and you've got these little shiny black seeds, and they're covered in this sticky kind of yellowy goo. So they're really fun to collect and process because you just end up with good sticky fingers. I'll share some tips about propagating and cleaning the seeds in a few minutes as well. So yeah, they're one of the ones that's, yeah, if you're collecting seed to store, then they're tricky to clean. But if you're collecting to grow straight away, it's not so bad. But we'll talk a bit about that. Don't be tempted if you see ones that look like this on a Pittosporum. Don't be tempted to collect those. So those are last year's seeds. So you'll see they've dried out completely. They've lost their kind of sticky goo there. And you might have success growing some from seed at this stage, but they lose their viability quite quickly. So it's much better to be patient, wait for this year's seed to open up. And you often find both on the plant at the same time. Here on the left, we've got some really lovely juicy wine berries. So wine berries are ready at the moment. Another one that the birds love. So you have to get in quite quick, but when they fruit, they are quite prolific. So if you've got a tree that's fruiting, your chances are there'll be some seed left for you. On the right hand side, is some Corphi. And as mentioned previously, it's really good to collect them at this stage while they're still green, and the seeds inside are still green. And you can sow them freshly and you get really good germination from that. On the left here is some ripe Coprosma propinquia. See these beautiful little white berries, which are also edible, in case you didn't know. If you get hungry while you're out seed collecting, you can snack on a handful of Coprosma berries. Don't fill you up, but they are very tasty. On the right-hand side on the picture there is them green, so unripe. Don't collect them at this point, so wait for them to ripen. Depending on your species of Coprosma that you're collecting, they could be different colours. So Coprosma propinquia is usually this white colour, sometimes kind of speckledy purple as well. Other Coprosma species can be black when they're ripe, or purple or red. So there's a few different colours depending on the species, but if they're green, they're not ready, so just be patient. And then this is a good haul of Coprosma seeds we got last week when we went out to check the property that we're going to tomorrow. Some tips for identifying. If you're still new to plant IDing, Coprosmas, one of the tips for identifying Coprosma from berries is if you open them up, so kind of squish them and squeeze all of the flesh off, you'll get what looks like a round seed, and then if you just give that a little squeeze, it will split in two. So Coprosmas always have these two seeds sitting together as one kind of unit, and that's in the picture on the left there. So, I mean, kind of jumping back a little bit to what things you want to collect. So, sorry, I'm just scrolling through my notes here because I'm going to jump around a little bit. But in terms of kind of key plants for collecting seed and for propagating, for restoration projects, it's going to be different depending on what your project is. So, for example, for a wetland restoration, you're probably looking at toys, flax, carex, maybe some pittosporum around the edges, some corphi maybe, cabbage trees, everyone's favourite. And then maybe on the outer edges, you would be looking at some things like Coprosmas. If you're trying to restore a forest area, you might be looking at different species. You might be looking at beech trees, ribbonwood, pittosporums again, and again Coprosmas for some kind of understory stuff. So checking in with your kind of local council, so checking in with Environment Southland, they have some good plant lists, I'm sure. In Southland, we've got the Southland Community Nursery. They've got some good plant lists on their website. And as I mentioned before, we've got a seed calendar here that's got some good lists of what to collect. So just jumping back there, sorry. So we'll get back to where we were, which is about labeling, processing and storage. So it's really, really important to label your seeds immediately, because you think you'll remember. You think, yeah, I'll remember that seed. I'll remember what it was. I'll remember where it came from. But 6 months later, when you come to put it in a seed tray somewhere, you'll be like, oh, now where did I collect this from? Or what kind of Coprosma was this? Once you've cleaned your Coprosma seeds, they all kind of look the same. So yeah, labeling is really important. And keeping a record as well of what you've collected. So we keep a spreadsheet. We use Google Docs and we have a spreadsheet, and we just keep simple information, the date, what we've collected. We put in the common name for our own reference, but we also put in the botanical name, because without getting too much detail, some plants, sometimes you have multiple plants with the same common name, but putting in their scientific name or the botanical name, it's only can be only one thing. So it's kind of good practice to do that. Also helps you a little bit with learning and identifying when you start kind of learning these things. But yeah, so your species name, where you've collected it from. If it's on your own property, I mean, that's probably pretty easy. If you're on dockland, things like your kind of like more specific location. If you use apps on your phone for plant IDing, there's apps like iNaturalist. You can record what you've collected, and it will record. So if you use the app, you take a photograph of what you're collecting, and save it into the app. It will save your location, your date, and help you identify what it is as well if you're unsure. So that's a really good one. So that's iNaturalist. So yeah, who's collected it? Kind of quantities, maybe not necessary, but it's kind of good to if you're collecting on large scale. And then kind of any notes as well. So yeah, labeling, very important. Processing. So there's a few ways you can approach it with processing seed. I used to be very much quite particular about cleaning seed, removing all the debris, removing all the stickiness off the pittosporum seeds, making sure they were all beautiful and clean and dry, and storing them in nice glass jars and labeling them. Now after a few years of doing it, I'm perhaps a little bit less particular when it comes to processing. And the reason why is, and this is just my theory, say your pittosporum, you collect it, it comes in its capsules with its lovely sticky seed. You can spend hours cleaning it off, put it into storage somewhere, an old fridge for storing seed, whatever. You put it in storage somewhere. You leave it a few months. Spring comes around. You think, right, it's time to put my seed down. So you get your seed trays ready and you pour your beautiful clean seed on, cover it over, and you put it aside to germinate. So there's quite a lot of work involved. Or you collect your seed and then you immediately put it into a seed tray. So you'd have your seed tray, your seed raising mix, and you can kind of, rather than having to process the seeds, you can literally just kind of, if it's something like pittosporum, just pick out the seeds and into the seed tray. For berries, you can just squish them into there, especially things like fuchsias, which have lots of tiny little seeds in the berries and a real pain in the butt to clean. Just squishing them into the seed tray and covering lightly with some seed raising mix, and then immediately putting it into whichever area you have prepared for seed raising. And you get the same kind of germination rates. So it really depends on, I guess, whether you want to keep some seed back for future use. So maybe you're not ready to grow it yet. Maybe you're thinking ahead to the future and you want to store it for a little while. Then you definitely need to clean it and you need to spend the time getting all of the debris off, getting all of the what's the word I'm looking for? Getting all the fruit clean. And also sometimes you need to treat them for insects as well, because some of the seed species will have insects in there. So if you're storing longer term, then yes, you definitely do need to clean seeds. But if you're not, if you're going to process, put the seed down immediately and put it somewhere to grow, then you can be a little bit slack with your processing. You didn't hear that from me. So if you do decide to clean it, storage, I have an old fridge. It's not plugged in. I just have an old fridge that I keep in a shady spot behind the house. And I keep when I do store seed, I keep it in there. It keeps it cool, it keeps it dry, it keeps it away from pests, so mice and rats specifically. If you are storing, you want to store things in sealed containers. So jam jars are really good for storing seed, or just little Ziploc bags. And just remember to label. So label, always important. If you're putting your seed down immediately in seed trays, put a plant label in there with your collection date. What we do is in our plant collecting register, we put a number against each seed that we've collected. And each time we collect seed, so if we've collected seed, 2 times in a year, we'll have 2 different numbers for that seed. And that number goes on everything. So that number goes on the bags if we're storing it, or the jars if we're storing it in jars. It goes on a label on the seed tray. And then once the seeds are bigger, it goes, the plants are bigger, it goes on the plants as well. So we know where our plants have come from, and you can kind of keep a track of everything. But yeah, in terms of storage, somewhere cool and dry, and away from pests. You might have a back room of the house, you might have a pantry. You can store stuff in the freezer as well. Yeah, so there's a few storage options. A kind of side note about viability. Some species don't store well, and they don't hold their what we call viability. So they quite quickly lose the germination rate, or quite quickly decreases the germination rate. And it's usually, it's not a hard and fast rule, but a good rule of thumb is like the smaller a seed is, so the more short-lived its viability, if that makes sense. So things like carex, their viability drops quite quickly. Beech trees is a notorious one. Their viability drops really quickly. So they need to be planted within the same year that you collect them, because they don't last. Other things store well, and stay viable for many, many years. Some of the bigger seeds, like your podocarp seeds, so things like Cahicateas, Matai, Miro, Remu, their seed lasts for longer, but it also takes longer to germinate. So it's just a side note, slightly off topic. In terms of collecting, when we're talking about seed saving, I did have some things to show you, but basically just keep a collection of bags, jars, paper bags, things like that, useful things. So yeah, for collection, we use like big paper bags that you get from the supermarket, are really good for collecting things like ribbon woods and toys. Some examples, I don't know if you'll be able to see on the screen. So we've got a big bag, and this is full of flax. Smaller bags for collecting smaller amounts of seed, little plastic bags for collecting the berries in. Yeah, so it's good to have just a mixture of things. Old bread bags are really handy, really good for if you're collecting leaf litter if you're going to go that route. Just filling a bread bag up with leaf litter, really satisfying, and you feel like you've got a really good stash of something. Yeah. So processing, if you're going to process your seeds, some things that are really handy to have are sieves. Just an old kitchen sieve is really handy for cleaning pulpy seeds. And you can just kind of squish them into the sieve, run it under the tap, and you kind of keep squishing it, keep running it under the tap and washing away the pulp. You can, with the pulpy seeds, you can kind of, big jars are handy. You can put them in a big jar, fill it with water, get your hand in there and squish all the seeds, and then you pour off the water, and the pulp will pour away, and the heavier seeds will drop to the bottom, and you kind of keep doing that. So pour the water off, put some fresh water in, give it another squish around, pour it off. It's a really good way for cleaning pulpy, fleshy fruits. Grasses and things, I used to store flax. I used to separate out the seeds from the seed heads. Flax have those lovely chunky black seed heads that once you squish them, they pop open with lots of nice shiny seeds. I used to quite thoroughly pop all the pods open and collect all the seeds and put them in a jar. Now I actually just keep them in their seed pods in a paper bag. But and the same with toy, you can spend hours like pulling the fluffy seeds off toy seed heads and putting them in some kind of container to store them, or you can keep them in a paper bag and just keep them somewhere dry and cool. And then when it comes to sowing the seed, you can literally just put a seed head down on a tray put some dirt on top and let it go. So you don't have to be too particular sometimes, or I guess is what I'm saying. You can be quite loose and have a bit of fun with it. Some seeds, how do I put it? Some seeds need to they need to be stored. How do I put this? They need to be stored somewhere kind of cold, so maybe in the freezer, because they go into dormancy, and to break that dormancy, you need this change in temperature. So you can put some seed in a freezer, which mimics, I guess, winter. It mimics the seasons, the cycles, so it mimics the cold temperatures of winter that it would be found in nature. Yeah, stratification, that's it, exactly. Thank you. Stratification and scarification. So some seeds do benefit from stratification. And that can be either being put in the freezer or in the fridge for, say, like 6 weeks, and then bringing out to break that dormancy. And some with scarification, again, it's not always necessary. You're kind of trying to mimic nature. And in nature, like for example with cauldfly, nobody's out there in nature nipping little bits out of a cauldfly seed with nail clippers. They get bounced around in the gravel in rivers, I guess, is what people try and mimic, but it's not always necessary. So I feel like sometimes what I've learned over the years is sometimes things are made more complicated than they need to be, and you can do things in a simpler way by just thinking about kind of what nature does. So in terms of stratification, like I say, you're mimicking nature by putting it in a cold place, mimicking winter, and then bringing it out again is mimicking spring, bringing it out of dormancy. Or you could just sow your seed in autumn, leave it outside in a sheltered area where it experiences the cold of winter naturally, and then come spring and it's time for it to germinate, it germinates naturally. So yeah, you can make more work for yourself than you need to. So sometimes these things we can kind of skip and just do it the easy way. A lot of what I discovered, so we've been growing native plants at the nursery for the last, I guess, 6 or 7 years. And I've been growing native plants for probably about 10 years now. And a lot of it is experimentation. So you just kind of try things and see what works. And there's lots of great guides out there. There's lots of good books about propagating and germinating. But yeah, I always just go back to, like, what does nature do? And can I mimic nature? And does it have to be hard? Sorry, I've gone slightly off topic, but never mind. Some of the other things you'll need. So propagation media, and what we mean by that is the dirt that you grow your plants in. So for most of our native plants we grow, I'll just skip forward the one, we use Dalton's. So we use the seed raising mix, which is, we've just found, is a really good consistent product. You can buy it at Bunnings, or if you're doing a larger scale project, you can actually just order like a pallet or half a pallet from them, and they'll ship it down to you. So it's just a really good consistent seed raising mix. There are obviously other ones that you can buy and try. I guess one of the reasons why we specifically use a seed raising mix rather than growing it in standard potting mix or compost is, one is to do with drainage. So you find that seed raising mix is lighter and has better drainage than potting mix, so your seed don't suffer so much from things like damping off, which is like a fungal infection where they'd be growing really beautifully and then they just seem to die, and they basically rot from the stem upwards and just die off. So you can kind of avoid things like that and just rotting and mold and things like you might end up with in your nursery, like moss growing on things and liverwort growing on things. So all the things that you can kind of avoid if you use a really good seed raising mix. And then the other thing that we use at the nursery is their cutting mix. So we haven't talked much about cuttings, but I don't know if we're going to have time, but we can jump back to that if we need to. So when you're sowing your seeds, how you sow them is kind of determined by what seeds they are. I'm going to just jump forward here. So things like toy, like I've mentioned before, I will get the seed head, which is the flower head of the toy plant, literally lay that out on a seed tray, which I've got one here to show you. And I can share some information in the chat as well about where to get these from. But these black seed trays, like I think you can get them from like Mitre 10 if you just need a few, or you can order them in bulk from places like Dalton's sell them in bulk. So I would just fill that with seed raising mix, lay my toy on top, and then put like a fine covering of seed mix on top of that. So you're just aiming for a really light covering so you can't see the seed, but you're not absolutely, you've not got a big thick centimetre of dirt on top of them. But smaller seeds, generally, you just want a really light covering. For other seeds, like bigger seeds, nuts, you put them a bit deeper, so you give them a bit of a thicker covering. And again, it depends on the seed's requirements as well. Some seeds need light to germinate. Grass seeds, so tussocks, red tussocks and silver tussocks, they germinate better if they've got more light levels on the seed. So just give them a real fine covering of dirt, so don't bury them deep. And then also for some seeds like Corfi, if you think about how Corfi naturally grow, they grow on the edge of rivers. A seed drops into the rivers and gets carried along in the gravel, and it will, or in the water, and then it will wash up onto the edge of the river and be in the kind of river gravel and germinate in that kind of condition. So you can, for seeds like Ko-Fi, again, you put down your seed raising mix, put down your Ko-Fi seeds, and then put a layer of fine gravel on top. And it's quite good for not only kind of mimicking what they do in nature, but it's good for stopping things like liverwort growing, and doesn't really grow on gravel, and makes weeds easy to pull out if weeds start popping up in there as well. We do it for things like Corfi, but I know that Southland Community Nursery, they cover most of their seed in the fine pea gravel, and they find it works really well for them and their conditions. So I guess like try a few things out, see what works well for you. We are running out of time very quickly. It's obviously I'm talking a lot. So I guess just quickly we'll cover off if you were going to be growing plants yourself, and you wanted to set up your own wee nursery, just some tips for choosing a site. And these apply to whatever size your nursery is going to be. So you might just have a small space, you might want to grow 100 plants, and you might just do it down the side of your house. Or if you've got a bigger project going on, you might set up your own dedicated nursery space. You might have a tunnel house for germinating seed. You might have a shade house for keeping seed protected from the harsh sun and the wind. But some things to think about are location. So the first few years that I grew seeds, I put seedlings out in the middle of this. I did it all from home, so in the back garden when I started. And the first year I had some kahikatea growing. I didn't have a project for them. I just wanted to grow them. And I had these gorgeous little kahikatea seedlings, and they were, like a few centimeters tall. And I was like, sweet, I'll just put them over this area of the garden, on pallets over winter. I'm sure they'll be fine. They're native seeds, they'll be really hardy. And most of them got killed by the frost. So it was a real realization, the reason why it's called a nursery, because these are little babies and they need nurturing and caring for. So choosing a location, you want somewhere that's sheltered, sheltered from high winds, sheltered from frost, sheltered from kind of harsh rains to a degree. You want to try and somewhere that you can control the environment as much as possible. So on your properties, it might be, like I mentioned, if you're just doing a small area, it might be like down the side of the house where it's kind of protected from wind. Maybe it's on the kind of west side or the east side where it just gets morning sun or just gets a little bit of afternoon sun but doesn't get the heat in the middle of the day. But if you're looking at doing a bigger project, you'd look at areas on your property that are sheltered. Kind of in the same way that if you're on a farm, you provide shelter for your animals, you kind of need to do the same for your plants. And you'll know if you're on a farm and you've got a big property, you'll know that the kind of microclimates of the different areas of your property. So yeah, again, just reiterating, picking an area that is sheltered from the harsh conditions that we get in Southland. Light and orientation. Some things need a lot of light to germinate, and some things don't. So depending on your species, it can depend where you grow things, but generally somewhere with shaded kind of filtered light for germinating, east or north facing, often give you that gentle morning light. And then you can have full sun areas when you come to harden off your plants, which is when your plants have germinated, you've picked them out, they're a bit bigger. Other things to look at are water and drainage. So you want a reliable water supply. Someone is saying an area close to water, my initial mistake. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Close to water, you need a reliable water supply. Easy access for hoses or irrigation. We use our nursery, we're lucky, we're on a town water supply. And we have a little timer with 4 nozzles for the tap, and we've got 4 hoses attached, and we have 4 sprinklers. And they cover the different areas of our nursery. If you've got a larger area, you might need something more substantial. And a smaller area, you might just hand water things if you're just growing, a handful of plants. But yeah, close to water. Having to carry watering cans around is just untenable. It doesn't work. The opposite of that, you also want somewhere that is well drained and doesn't get waterlogged, because none of your plants really want to be sitting in kind of boggy, waterlogged areas, especially when they're young. So somewhere that's slightly raised, you can kind of overcome some of those problems just by simple things like if you're just doing a small scale thing, just having pallets and putting your seedlings on pallets, just keeping them off the ground. Other things to think about is where you're going to store your soil. We get big meter bags of soil from Diax, and we have them drop them off at the nursery. They deliver them, and they drop them right next to our potting bench. So it's right there where we need it, because again, you get quite sick of carrying tubs of potting mix around the place, or shoveling potting mix from one area to another. So have a think about where you can put soil, and having a surface that you can work on. So a potting bench. I started out with just a couple of trestle legs and an old door for the top, as a table, as a potting bench, and that worked well for me. And we actually, down at the nursery, we actually have a really similar setup. So we have a couple of trestle legs, and we have an old stainless steel bench top, upside down, which makes a perfect potting bench surface. And then just think about the kind of space and infrastructure. It doesn't take much space to put down a few trays of seed, but once you prick them out and put them into pots, they obviously take up a lot more space. So it's kind of future-proofing and thinking ahead of where you're going to store stuff. And then I guess a little bit about biosecurity, pest control, is if you're on a farm, is just keeping stock away from your plants. but also thinking about rodents, protection from rabbits. They come into the nursery, and rabbits absolutely love red tussock. And they will come and chomp on your little babies you've had growing, that you've carefully tended and loved and cared for. And then you come in one morning and the rabbits have nibbled the tops off. It's very, very frustrating. So netting, yeah, and just a protective area. What else do we? Oh, we probably have close to running out of time, so I might just wrap up. And it's just a nice picture of some of the stuff we've got growing in the tunnel house at the nursery. So this is what you can look forward to. We've got on the left there is some Carex sector, little baby Carex sector. So they will grow into big meter by meter plants, perfect for your wetlands. And on the right is some ribbonwood, which is another fantastic plant for restoration projects. We were going to talk about a little bit about ecosystems and succession, but we'll probably just skip that and move on to kind of wrapping up and taking some questions. So I guess things to think about for practical planning and looking ahead to your own projects. Number one, assess your site conditions. And this is for where you're restoring, the area that you're restoring. Is it damp? Is it dry? Are you trying to recreate a wetland, or are you looking at restoring a more forest-based kind of ecosystem? So from that, you can create your species list. Again, refer back to some good resources that are out there, like the Southland Community Nursery website has a good species list. And have a look at the things that will grow specifically for your conditions and your area and the region that you're in. After that, you want to identify where you can collect seed from. If you're lucky enough to have your own bit of remnant bush or an existing wetland, then you've got a collection site ready for you. Otherwise, again, you need to look at obtaining landholder permissions to collect seed. From there, you can plan your seed collecting calendar. So again, we've got some resources we can share with you, but it's about just different times of year. The different seeds are ready at different times of the year. You'll find things like alarias, which are the tree daisies, are ready really early in the year, and they disappear quite quickly. Some things are ready in summer, which is usually your tussocks, your toys, your flaxes are ready in summer. And then for most of the berries, you're looking at autumn capsules, things like lancewoods and marble leaves. They are ready usually through winter. And they're one of the things that you've got to be quite patient for. So you might spot a good site for collecting. You might locate, a beautiful tree that you can collect from, and you just have to kind of keep an eye on it. Sometimes it takes months and months and months for the seed to ripen. So yeah, some things you just have to be patient. The collecting is the fun part. So plan when you can go out and collect. And again, it's just down to keeping an eye on when things are ready. The growing, which is again even more fun. So that's planning where you will put your nursery, where your plants will grow, the space that you've got to expand and fill with even more plants. And then planting, your planting plans. So we didn't really talk about that, but we've got some kind of resources that we can share if anyone is interested. So yeah, that's basically we just covered most of the things off. I guess we'll have some time for some questions, for any questions that you've got, but I guess one of the things I was going to suggest as a kind of exercise for you to take away is drafting a collecting and planting plan for your chosen site. So what we've just covered, really, like assessing and mapping and describing your site conditions and your ecological district, looking at your species, thinking about the quantities of what you need to collect and when you're going to collect them, and then permissions that you required and how you're going to process and store your seed and your plants. So I think that covers off pretty much everything we were going to talk about. I'll go back
thank
to
you very much, Josie.
no, my pleasure.
No, it has been really comprehensive. You covered so much stuff.
Yeah.
People are going to be going away with a lot of ideas, and they're going to have to do a lot of planning.
Yeah,
Planning. The planning. You've got this wonderful vision. You're going to have to develop some patience and do lots of the planning to, when you see it's going to be ready, get your permissions, like where you're going to plant it in the garden, decide where you're going to actually have your nursery, make sure that you get the soil delivered the right way. Thank you. That experience has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of elements to it, and it's a lot to try and cover in an hour.
Yes, an hour.
Yeah. But hopefully it's given people something to think about, to take away, and some things to bear in mind when they're planning. I noticed Jenny is asking tips on taking cuttings. We tried to grow from hebe from cuttings, but they all seem to rot and lose their leaves pretty quickly. So I would say, so there's a couple of things with hebes. One is like, don't be disheartened, depending on the species. Some species actually are notoriously bad for rot, particularly, which one is it? I'm trying to think. There's one of the ones that grows wild, Salicifolia, or otherwise known as Coromiko, can get rot quite quickly, or other diseases and stuff that will knock them back. But hebes are one of the kind of easier things to grow from cuttings if you've got the right conditions. So number one is get some good cutting mix. I don't know what you were putting them into to try and grow them on. If you're putting them in like compost or heavy potting mix, then they're going to get too wet, and that obviously encourages rot, and they will drop their leaves and they'll be pretty sad and unhappy. The other thing is about where on the plant you're taking the cuttings from and the time of year. So we normally take cuttings over kind of late autumn and winter, and the material that you're taking is kind of semi-mature, so you don't want to take like the really fresh green tips off a plant. You want a little bit of kind of like, if you look at the stem, like the stem of the plant, and it might be like it's covered in leaves up here and it's really green, and then it's start to go a little bit kind of browner down here. You want to snip it off there where it's brown, and that's where it's kind of got some strength in it as well. So if you've been taking really fleshy, fresh stem cuttings, then they do have a tendency to kind of rot and not survive. Yeah. But good luck. Hebes, they're pretty fun to grow. They're not necessarily a project that you would use in, or sorry, a plant that you would use in restoration. If you were taking cuttings. So, and the reason for that is to do with genetics. So if you were doing a restoration project and say you want some Hebe salicifolia, which is the wild Coromiko, the big ones that you see kind of on the edges of the bush, in scrublands, what was I saying? I forget what I was saying. Yeah, so if
You're
you
trying
take
to
cuttings,
explain that you're trying to get more variety, genetic
yeah,
variety, rather
exactly.
than just use it from, cuttings from one plant. So you
Yeah,
kind of get a lot of clones.
yeah, exactly. So the genetics you'd end up with basically a whole load of clones of a plant, which just, while on the surface might not be a bad thing, longer term it just means like if there's disease or change in climate and stuff like that, the more diversity there is, the more kind of protection there is within the plant ecosystem. Yeah. Hebes are, if you're going to try and grow them from seed, they do germinate quite readily, especially salicifolia, Coromiko. It germinates quite readily, but they're very tender, so you have to really baby them when they're small. Yeah, and just give them a lot of space, a lot of air around the plants. Yeah. Has anyone else got any questions?
If you want to just pop something down on the notes in the chat, then we can go there. Otherwise, I'm going to make a few up from the various things that people have suggested that they're places of interest. If you've got any suggestions, one of the ones that came in quite late was on motel gardens. I mean, would perhaps the Hebes be good for the motel gardens?
What was that garden? Sorry.
For motels.
Oh,
So
yeah.
presumably wanted to put some natives around motels rather than, lots of exotics.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Yep. Hebes are a good choice. I could talk a little bit about it's not really like restoration planting, it's more decorative garden planting.
Isn't it nice to have some natives?
But yep, there's absolutely nothing wrong with some pretty gardening and decorative gardening. Some good natives for that, or some good Hebes. If you want the wild ones, like Hebe salicifolia, again, Coromiko, and then Hebe, I'm trying to think of the Latin name. Sorry, the name is escaping me at the moment. But there are options. But also the ones you get from the garden centre with the pretty flowers, like I shouldn't say it, but you can buy one of the pretty Hebes, and we grow some at the nursery as well because we find that it's really good for fundraising. So we grow some of the prettier ones that have like purple, pink flowers. You can buy one plant from the garden centre and snip, 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 and grow some more. Yeah, Veronica. So Hebes.
Depend a little on where your motel are.
Yeah.
Another one very different. But again, sort of perhaps more shrubs and things, is gully restoration to bring that back to natives. There's a lot of gullies, they've been cleared, they've been grazed, and now people are changing their minds about it.
Yeah, so gullies, again, gullies are they're pretty cool. They're pretty good ecosystems to grow in because they're kind of naturally sheltered. Usually, but not always, you've got like streams at the bottom. So they're quite a nice ecosystem. You kind of look at different plants. Usually it's going to be, I'm trying to think what you would grow in a gully. You've got some beautiful plants like Hoharia glabrata, which is I guess one of the lace barks would be their common name. But you have to be really careful about species. Yeah, thanks, Katrina. I was in the middle of typing that out in the chat myself. Yeah, Hebes are they're now classified as Veronicas. Yeah. But yeah, some gully species. So Hoharia glabrata, really beautiful plant that grows naturally in gullies. And you will find things like some different Hebes that grow naturally, those lower growing stuff. And then shrubby stuff like the coprosmas are good in gullies as well. But also things like Would you put toys in a gully? It depends whether there's a water source as well. So it depends, like if your gully is part of a kind of wetland ecosystem, or whether it's a kind of drier, rockier, you know, up the side of a hill kind of gully. So I guess it depends on the conditions.
Is it a good excuse to go and do some visiting of areas that still have vegetation on them?
Oh,
Go and
for
have a
sure,
look
yeah.
and find out what's there first.
Yeah. It's always good
Do the
when you're
same.
planning a restoration is to find similar areas in nature and go and have a look and see what's growing there, and you can learn what will grow well in your conditions. But the only kind of thing to bear in mind is that if you're looking at very mature ecosystems, they will have a different set of plants to a young ecosystem. And in terms of restoration, you are looking at kind of like the young ecosystem, so the pioneer plants and the things that will pop up first in an ecosystem when an area has been cleared, for example. It's the plants that will come back first, and often that is things like coprosmas, or depending on your area, can be manuka, comes up pretty quickly and kind of starts to restore the edges of an ecosystem. But if you're a wetland, the things that will come up straight away without you wanting them to is the rushes, and you'll probably find your carex sectors will pop up kind of naturally in a wetland system. Katrina, there's a really good wetland to visit just out of Manapuri, and I forget the name of it.
Orakatu.
Home Creek.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Well,
Home
we can't-
Creek is really nice as well, actually. Home
Yes.
Creek's a good,
Yeah, both, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
Rakatu,
Rakatu, is it?
yeah, is the much larger one, but they're both restoration projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, go to both. Go on.
Yeah, take a road
Yeah.
trip.
Thursday.
Depending on where you are, so Rakatu, maybe we could put that in the chat so people can see the name of it.
Okay.
It's just kind of south or in between Manapuri and Tuatapuri, isn't it? And they've done a beautiful restoration project there where
Yeah.
they took a really kind of holistic approach to it, and they went into the area and they kind of opened up the blockages, so to speak, and let the water flow naturally back into the area, and things naturally started to grow again. So they got a lot of carex sector, which naturally just popped up in the places that it was meant to be. And then I think they've gone in afterwards and done some planting of other species around that. But it's a really good really good example of a restoration project. And yeah, Home Creek is lovely because it's like a natural
Been going on
riparian
longer.
system, and it's got that beautiful winding kind of yeah.